Hello and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. So what is the future of TV? We know that digital video is all the rage, but traditional TV still has such a tremendous value in the marketplace, especially considering the upcoming elections. However, there are a lot of changes coming, including how will 5G impact how we consume video content, whether it's on your 60-inch Vizio or on your cell phone or PS4 consuming YouTube content. Think about how much data is used in targeting TV audiences, but how will GDPR, CCPA, and other privacy concerns affect that? Many of these concepts and a lot more were discussed at the TV of Tomorrow show, where I spoke on a panel with today's guest discussing cross-platform, data-driven, and accountable is an advertising revolution at hand. Steve Young is the Vice President of Advanced Media at DataLab USA, and he's a subject matter expert in the TV industry, data, and TV ad sales. And on this episode, we'll discuss the state of TV as it is today, where its future is headed in the marketing and advertising mix, where TV and video fits into the consumer's journey, leveraging data for TV, addressable, OTT, VOD, programmatic, digital video, the TV of Tomorrow show, as well as other famous quarterbacks named Steve Young. So let's tune in to a data quarterback with a TV shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Steve, thank you for joining us on A Shark's Perspective from the TV of Tomorrow show. So if you would, tell us a little bit about your background and your career to date.
Wonderful. Thank you, Kenneth.
You're welcome.
Again, that's Steve Young is my name. I'll tell you a little bit of my background and tell you where I am today. My background has been in the television space, primarily linear national advertising sales with NBC Universal. I moved on from there to Dish Media Network, where we launched the addressable platform in 2012. Having been selling addressable for 5+ years, and that's where I got to know you, Kenneth. Moved on from Dish to DataLab Digital, a data aggregator, compiling data from many of the data providers in the marketplace, but primarily the financial data providers, and focusing in finance and insurance category. 2012
at Dish. That's scary when you think about it.
No kidding.
Because we've talked several times, and I don't even remember covering that date, but that's pretty scary. I mean, it's a one dog year ago, but it seems a lot longer than that. So, we're here doing the show at TV of Tomorrow, and I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on the show as a whole.
So I think the show is a great platform to share ideas. I think
couldn't agree more.
When I got here, I had my own views, and I had this conversation offline. I had my own views about where I thought the media marketplace is moving towards, what I think are the challenges, and where I think there are going to be some opportunities.
So do you look at it any differently now, being on the data side as opposed to being, one of the TV providers?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. In the TV side of it, albeit we'll say it's broken. We know it's broken because of just clearly by what digital
right.
technology is allowed to have happen. But at least it was clear, right?
Yeah.
In a quick nutshell, in TV, if I as a salesperson went to a agency that was representing a brand and said, I can offer you X number of impressions against a demo and against a gender that's going to help you reach a given target. That was my only commitment that I had to do. It was clean and simple. And when I got into the addressable side of the space in my Dish days, it was more targeted.
Mm-hmm.
There was more attribution on the back end, right? But if things went wrong, as far as I was concerned, I don't know anything about that. I know how to deliver a message. I know how to have the networks that are available. I have these are at my disposal. This is under my tentacles as a Dish representative. But anything around the data and how it works or how it didn't work, that fell in the data house. So to answer your question, when I moved over to the data side of the house, I realized it's a lot more to it than that. There's so many moving parts, and there's so many factors that go outside of, even if you reach a given target, there are marketing or marketplace rather, weather, is your product priced appropriately, right? There's so many different things that go
into
location, right? So you got a variety of things that go into whether a product is going to sell or not.
There are hundreds of conferences in marketing and advertising throughout the country, but I think from an advertising perspective, one of the things that TV of Tomorrow does differently per se is it really does a great job of focusing in on one channel better than almost any other channel type conference. I mean, when you talk about social, there's so many different social channels, and they all have completely different habits across, each one of the different channels may have a different audience, may have a different temperament. But, a Comcast customer versus a Dish customer versus a DirecTV customer and so on really aren't that much different. So the medium is really what everybody's talking about and focused on. And I think that's one of the interesting things is you see people trying to fix what is a somewhat declining, I don't know if it's industry, because we think if you think of TV and video together, video is skyrocketing. So if you marry the two in the conversation together and just, consider it on a, streamed as opposed to on a set-top box, there's still a lot of hope and potential in the industry. But it is a very unique conference to learn anything and everything there is about advertising. Kind of curious to your thoughts on that.
I couldn't agree with you more. Let me tackle each one of those points if I can recollect. The first, when you say that a Dish or a Comcast or a DirecTV customer is about the same, they would tell you otherwise.
Agreed.
Right?
Agreed.
They would tell you that
and there's some nuances, of course.
There's some nuances against that, but I hear your point loud and clear.
It's not as different as Facebook versus Twitter versus Snapchat versus TikTok.
Couldn't agree with you more. In terms of this particular conference, and what I find different, this is my third or fourth TV of Tomorrow conference, I believe, is that it's really more about what do we think is going to happen on the television landscape tomorrow. Let's take inventory of where we sit today, and let's project in terms of what we think are going to be the impactors of where it's going to go tomorrow. Where I find it different and unique from other conferences, and this is not to disparage other conferences, they're fine, but they're more about hawking whatever your product is and how it fits into the TV landscape. These are just people that are sharing their perspectives, their experiences, what they know today, and how they think it impacts. I'm talking about TV of tomorrow, that is. And I find that to be much more, it's almost like watching a commercial or a branded commercial. Yeah. That's, it's like, it's not about that. It's like, this is the content. And you're getting so many different divergent opinions. So let me draw back to what you mentioned earlier. I feel like when I walked in here, I had my own perceptions of what I thought the marketplace was moving to. Now I would say that that's changed by about 20 to 25%.
Yeah, could not agree more. And it's to that point. I mean, most of Tracy, who does a phenomenal job with this conference, most of what she does with her sessions are panel interviews, which is different than most conferences. Most conferences, you've got a keynote. That's where I speak. 99% of the time, I'm up on stage by myself talking. Each one of these, I say probably 85 to 90% of these are panel sessions. So in each topic, whether it be attribution or the distribution of data or whatever, you've got diverse opinions just covering one topic, which is really great. And I'm with you. I mean, I feel like I've come from all aspects of being behind the camera, in front of the camera, producing direct response TV shows, to producing commercials, to producing the data for the spots we ran on Dish when I was at Axiom. But I thought I had a pretty good opinion on where things were, especially with connected TV today. I learned so much more. There's so much more in opinions that are smart opinions too.
Couldn't agree with you more. And then let me dovetail that a little further. Is because you have, as you may mention, divergent opinions from so many different people. Unlike other conferences, where you get a similar voice, so you're going to get a similar message, right? And we're all preaching to the choir, so everybody loves it. But you can't take that anywhere with you, right?
Agreed.
Here, to your point, your background's a little different than mine, but we cross paths at a certain point, and allows us to take. And I learned insights from you. We learned insights from others on that panel that we were on today, in addition to all the other panels. If there's any takeaway that I would say, and I shared this with Tracy, is you can't be in two rooms at one time, right? Sometimes you feel, and I don't want to gush too much about it, but there's sometimes there's intel that I would love to gather from this here. And let me close it here. I really appreciate the fact that all the panelists are accessible. I've been to other conferences where as soon as the conference is over, or as soon as that panel is over rather, they're out the back door and they're in their cars and they're going to wherever they got to go, right? That's not the case here. Everyone's accessible.
That's right. They go out the front door. No, just kidding. No, just kidding. So, one of the things though that I also came to appreciate, as well as everybody at least is trying to think of ways to move this forward. So, we're at the TV of Tomorrow show today. Do you think that they've put together? Do you think the conference speakers and panelists have come up with a solution, if you will?
No.
Yeah.
No, unfortunately, because I just don't think that we're there just yet.
Agreed.
I think that we have collectively come up with some sharp ideas.
Yeah.
But I think what I feel powerful about the conference is there's an acceptance that it's not Pollyanna. There's
Yes.
not this holy grail that someone came up with and says, oh, well, here's where we're going to go. One consistent theme I think I take away from the conference is transparency is needed, right? And secondly, rising tides lift all boats, right? We need to collectively work together. If this doesn't benefit me personally because my platform doesn't adhere to it, but it does someone else, that's knowledge that I have that I can share with whoever that customer is that I'm speaking to. When I say customer, I use that loosely. That could be an agency, and it could be a brand, it could be another platform. But if you share that, because if you don't, there are other places out there that are getting that communication in front, FANG, if you will. And they're clearly going to go, says, well, I can take that money because I have a solution on the ready for you right now. So we're disparate here where we are, but we have the capabilities of pooling this together. I think it'll come in short order. Short order to me is within the span of about 2 to maybe 3 years, but that's positive.
Agreed. So, I was having lunch with a gentleman earlier today, and he mentioned that he was here last year and said if he was lucky if he saw one panel talk about attribution. He said this year so far, and this was by midday of the second day, he said he'd seen 7 panels where it was the heavy focus of response. I know the first one I went to was talking about attribution, so it was good to see that we've moved beyond just a targeting capability, because I think marketers, digital, TV, the whole kit and caboodle, advertisers and publishers understand targeting as a whole better now. Now we're starting to have robust and pretty frequent conversations about attribution like we didn't before, even a couple of years ago when you and I were working closely together.
Completely agree with that. And I think that because oftentimes, to your point, targeting was the first portion. Like, how can I better target who my true customer is? And what does that mean, right? So to your point, we're past that hurdle. Now, we need to come back and retool that, but you can only retool that on the heels of attribution, right? How did it work, and where's my customer going from there, right? So you need to know what that journey is. Now, the next hurdle that I think that we need to go to is as we move from attribution, because I think there were so many learnings, to your point, there were so many panels that touched on that, is how do we follow that given customer across all of these different verticals?
Thank you.
That's going to be a challenge.
Yeah, so, and I did hear a few people bring that up. I brought it up on our panel where we spoke. I heard it early yesterday from Andy Barnett at AT&T DirecTV, Xander, talk about the customer journey. And really, I think one of the interesting things that you see that's a difference between the marketing conferences and the advertising conferences is your marketing conferences have a lot of focus on different aspects of the tech, but not like they do in the ad conferences like here. But in marketing conferences, you focus so much more on the customer and the customer journey, at least within especially the digital side. And you touch a lot of that on brand. Here they do not, and that's one of the things. It's not a knock against the conference, because all advertising conferences tend to be a little bit this way. They still need to focus more on the customer journey, if you will, because now that we see all the touch points and we're able to start attributing these, whether it's a blog post, an email, a Google search ad, or connected device or connected TV ad, or some spot like that, I think that's, to me, one of the evolutions I'd like to see go forward is to talk about all the different touch points, including TV, which works amazingly well, but it's still part of a bigger conversation, if you will.
I'd agree with you, and you can only talk about so many things at a given time. Yeah. But yes, I would absolutely agree with you on that, Kenneth, is that following the customer and what are the obstacles, the impediments as to why we can't track that customer. As we know, you and I have had this conversation, silos are killing all of that, right?
Absolutely.
There are walled gardens and a host of different reasons as to why someone doesn't want to share that particular information with someone else. But I think that'll be the next iteration of where we're going with this. I think technology is going to help, right? Because it can bypass some of those hurdles. But I would agree with you that should have been I would have loved to have heard more about that and how some are trying to tackle that. And we saw that in bits and pieces. You brought it up, to your point. I've heard a few other people bring it up, but it wasn't a consistent theme about tracking the customer across the process.
So, do you think they talked enough about data at this conference? Being somebody that now works in the data space.
So we talked about it on the surface, but
Yeah.
I didn't think that we had enough data
Not
mining
deep dives,
individuals in there. And I don't know if that was necessarily the point for this, because you're preaching to a choir of people.
Exactly.
You want to take that data conversation on to people that are fighting against it. And if I may dovetail that,
Yeah.
I think that some of the biggest takeaways that we're going to see is with the advent of agency holding companies buying data providers, whereas in the past they would lock horns, right? Now they're going to blend and complement one another. Well, let me say this. Now that would be the theory, right? Now
Right.
the application of that when it comes to fruition, that could be altogether different.
What would you like to see in future shows?
I would like to see some of we have brands here from time to time.
Yeah.
Right. Avis was here this year. I believe it was Coca-Cola was here, I think, last year when I was at one of the conferences. I would like to see some of the sticking points at an agency. Directly,
Absolutely.
right? I'd like to see a buyer on the digital side juxtaposed with a buyer on the TV buy side and strategists on both sides of that to tell you what their world is like. They're not willingly saying, I just don't want to do this. There
Agreed.
are hurdles that they have to deal with. And I think if we can hear from them, that closes the loop on the conversation. Doesn't necessarily bring a solution to the table, but it allows us to understand what those pain points are. And we have to be the solution-based people on our side, we
Agreed.
being all the people in this conference here.
Yeah, and we've worked with a lot of the smart agencies that sit in the TV plus TV digital space that they know it and they know it extremely well. What I'd love to see are a lot of the non-TV, the smart TV agencies come. I'd love to just have them sit and listen to, because they're the ones that are driving the conversations with their brands. And if you're going to get more people to not adopt, linear will at some point exist in some other form and fashion down the road, but to really get them to understand more of where we're going with addressable and advanced. I'd love to see more of agencies who don't know, per one of the questions from our moderator today said, do you think even know that if those agencies know what questions to ask or not? No, I'd love to have them come here and learn as well, because there's so much that they can get that we can share to move this thing forward.
And it would only help their business.
Absolutely.
Right? Because now they're at the mercy of, I don't really know what's going on in the marketplace, right? So what happens behind that, Kenneth, is they stay away from it.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
I'm not going to step into something I know nothing about, raise that to a client of mine, and they say, tell me more.
Mm-hmm.
I'll stick to the tried and true. I'll buy digital in its silo because I understand that. I'll buy television in its silo because I understand that. I'll dabble in connected TV because it performs well.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, I'm not looking to do anything else.
So probably in your mind, what do you think was probably the best panel session that you've seen out of the 2 days? Personally, I think it would probably be the one that was cross-platform, data-driven, and accountable as an advertising revolution.
I couldn't agree with you.
Yeah, I think there were two on the end. Oh my God, they were good. I think one was name was Steve, and the other's name was Shark. So
couldn't have two better.
So how does an agency today, or how does either a brand or an agency, how should they go about making a smart TV buy today?
Well, you and I have had this conversation offline, and I think that, I hate to say it, business as usual is never a bad thing, because there are so many options out there that you can actually perform and do well.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't necessarily say that that's a bad. That's a B,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you want an A, I would say that you hold out dollars, right, for testing across a number of different platforms, with the expectation that some of it isn't going to perform to the way you think it is.
Agreed.
The goal is not about, I need to have this metric perform at the highest level. The goal is, I need to understand how it works, how it's moving.
Mm-hmm.
That's the goal.
So you live in Chicago. They do have a wonderful shed aquarium.
Yes.
But there are not a lot of sharks in Lake Michigan, unless they're stuffed animal toys that fell in. So you're on a show with a shark's perspective, with a guy on your panel nicknamed Shark, who's wearing a dress shirt with sharks on it. I've got to ask you, Steve Young, what is your favorite kind of shark and why? It is a question that often comes up at TVF tomorrow.
I gotta say, it's the great white. I mean, who doesn't love Jaws?
Exactly.
I'm a simple man when it comes to that. Although I gotta say, that I'd loosely call that a dress shirt, though, Kenneth.
Loosely. A little bit of starch would help. So, are you ready, Steve, for the 5 most interesting, important questions that you're going to be asked today?
I am.
All right. Number 1, Chicago Blackhawks or St. Louis Blues?
Come on. The Blues.
Okay.
Stanley Cup champs.
Well, I figured maybe Chicago's your new hometown.
Never
So,
take away from the
number
Blues.
2, programmatic or addressable?
Ooh, that's a good one. That's an awfully good one. I'm going to be
It's like burrito or
a homer.
hamburger.
I'm going to be a homer and go with addressable.
That's nothing wrong with that. Number 3, being on the data side or being on the TV publisher side?
Right now, being on the data side. As we move forward, that's an unknown.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole lot of consolidation in both, so
Right.
you never know.
Right.
Number 4, HBO or Netflix?
Oh, Netflix.
Thank
I
you.
dropped my HBO after Game of Thrones.
After Game of Thrones, hey, I'm sure that happened quite a lot. And number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Cornbread.
Okay.
Come on. My family comes from the South, so cornbread.
Good man. So, Steve, where can people find out more about you other than walking around the TV of Tomorrow's show? But where can people find out more about DataLab and follow your thought leadership on TV?
Find me on LinkedIn or send me an email. That's at syoung@datalabusa.com.
Do you get confused a lot in San Francisco with former quarterback Steve Young?
Oh, there was a time when anytime I would speak to someone on the phone, like the quarterback.
Yeah.
But I get
What's
a
it like
laugh
to
out
work
of
with
it.
Joe Montana? Yeah.
No, I get a laugh out of it though. So before we close, Kenneth, I would like to say one of my biggest takeaways from this conference has been, we talked about transparency earlier.
Yeah.
Let me just give you a little bit of a shameless plug on DataLab. We think that that's part of our strength. We're a data aggregator, as I mentioned earlier, and our goal is to provide the best data for the customer, not the best data that suits a given data source.
Yeah.
So to that end, for any of those who would like to know more about our company, please feel free to reach out to me, as I mentioned earlier. But most importantly, remember that in this new space, as long as you're candid and open, right, then your message is going to come through loud and clear.
As long as you say shameless plug ahead of time,
Yeah.
it's like adding air quotes. So, Steve, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Wonderful. As always, Kenneth, it's a pleasure.
So there was my conversation with Steve Young, the Vice President of Advanced Media at DataLab USA. And he's a subject matter expert in the TV industry, data, and TV ad sales. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, I've spoken at as well as attended marketing conferences, and I've done the same with advertising conferences. It's a much different environment, and having worked heavily in both digital and TV, I always find it incredibly interesting that at marketing conferences, most marketers aren't talking today about TV's value, despite how much their brands often spend on TV. They're talking mostly about digital and digital video, and that shift is continuing to increase. TV knows that it needs to change, and soon, but digital is marching forward at an impressive speed when considering the changes in spend. However, I would caution all marketers to really take another look again at TV. One simple test I always like to remind people of is to turn off your TV campaigns if you don't believe that TV works. Then, as you listen to the phones not ringing, that silence will help you figure out to turn back on those TV campaigns. It's still a very powerful medium and should not be ignored by marketers today. When working together with other channels, it can provide such significant lifts. Second, it would behoove us in the advertising space, especially with TV, to do a better job of focusing on the customer, which we do in the marketing space. It's one of the missing pieces needed. As consumers' habits have changed, not just in how they consume TV and video, you've truly got to look at all of the touch points and how that affects their journey. Look at how a TV ad works together with email blasts, blog content, digital banner ads, and social media channels. Tracking all of this is easier to do in digital, yes. Traditional TV, though, really needs to think of that, since changes in the market aren't being dictated by the brands and advertisers or the publishers. Today's changes are being pushed aggregately by the consumer, so stop siloing your efforts and your points of view. Third, I would highly recommend that more people attend great shows like the TV of Tomorrow show. Agencies could do so much more for their clients if they truly understood this area better, and they could, in turn, do so much more for their clients' customers. As Steve perfectly pointed out, a lot of agencies stay away from this because they don't know it well. Then they stay in their swim lane and buy digital in a silo, and that's bad. We need a lot more people and a lot more agencies to get involved and understand and appreciate the space. And for traditional TV, no, there's not a fix out there yet. However, TV is learning a lot from digital and changing consumer habits, and it needed to do so. It's still a big part of your spend generally, and an important way of how consumers get to know better your brand. It's a big tent, so come in and enjoy the party. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. It's been my privilege to speak with you today, and I thank you for your time. So if you need to turn off your TV and listen to a podcast called A Shark's Perspective, well, then I'm okay with that one at least. So please join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.